All right, well, we will go ahead and get rolling for today. It's so good to be with you all. Happy start of the semester for those of you who are starting your journey in social work. We are so glad you are with us here tonight. My name is Dwayne Brechek. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the executive director for the Michigan chapter of NASW. And I am one of the facilitators for this national student series. So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. We're so glad that you are here and have chosen social work. Um, if you haven't been a part of our student series before, this is a free monthly program that we do every month throughout the year for our national organization, and it is open to any BSW, MSW, or doctoral level student. I will drop the link into the chat too, where you can find all of the past recordings as well as our upcoming sessions. We're super excited in October to be having an Organizing for Justice series, and that's going to be a student guide on unionizing in social work. So a very great
I
and
muted
timely
mine
topic
because
for
I was
us.
listening to yours.
Oh, and I'm just gonna keep people, please, if you can, make sure you stay muted. If not, I can handle that on this end. If you've got questions during today's session, please feel free to drop those into the chat, and we'll have a couple of times for those to get answered. So please feel free if you want to register for our October session. That registration is already open throughout the session today. If you want to keep networking and getting to know people, please continue to drop your LinkedIn's or your other social medias into the chat. We have folks from all over the United States here today. Saw Texas, Michigan, Ohio, Idaho, Minnesota, Maryland, North Carolina, Mississippi, and a whole host of other folks. So we're so excited that we're able to bring you all here together today. We are very thrilled to have one of my board members here from the Michigan chapter with us here today, Chris Fike, who is going to be talking on the role of social work in mutual aid, a extremely timely topic as future social workers. We know that you're stepping into our profession in a time of very deep social and systemic disruption. We're seeing this in our political spaces. We're seeing this in our social work spaces, and mutual aid communities coming together to meet each other's needs when institutions fail or cause harm is a powerful tool that we can use for justice and care. So Chris is gonna, I know, do a wonderful job of kind of walking us through mutual aid, what that may look like in social work right now, historical aspects of how that has been incorporated into our profession. And we've got about an hour and a half together today. So there'll definitely be some time for discussion. We'd love to hear from y'all and how mutual aid has intersected your work, or maybe how you would like it to intersect your work. So Chris, I'm going to go ahead and bring you up. If you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit more. Chris in our state is he's our Regional 5 board member, which is kind of the North Mid-Michigan area. And is just a wonderful social worker that has worked in a few states. So Chris, I think you should have access to pull your slides up and should be good to roll.
Cool. Thank you so much, Dwayne. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And in case you all are wondering where in Michigan I'm located, I'm going to do the hand thing. So I'm about right here. Like I'm just south of Saginaw Bay. Um, and like Dwayne said, I'm a member on the board of directors for NASW Michigan. I'm also a practicing social worker. I currently work as a clinician, a therapist at a nonprofit organization providing outpatient therapy. I also do contractual therapy work. Kind of my background a little bit. I use he, him pronouns. I check all the privilege boxes. So cis, het, white, male. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight is from my perspective, my lived experience. And I think that's important to acknowledge that this isn't necessarily a collective experience for everybody or a collective understanding for everybody, but it's my understanding and I'm going to share a perspective with you. So I hope that you're able to take the information, process it, make sense from kind of your own space and be able to come up with questions, find ways to use it, pull information out that's useful for you, practical for you. And then if there's stuff that just doesn't resonate, just doesn't fit, that's okay too. Like I think that's one of the really cool things about social work is like the way we do social work doesn't look the same for everybody, right? And that's what makes us a really cool profession. And so I'm going to present a little bit about my perspective and what it can look like specifically within our current political climate and what resistance can look like, what resistance might we might want resistance to look like as social workers, specifically within the frame of mutual aid. So I'm going to go ahead and attempt to pull up my slides.
Awesome. While you do that, Chris, I did just want to let folks know that we are recording today's session, and so it will be available on the national website probably within the next week or two. So if you need to step out or miss a piece of it or just want to watch something back, we'll have the slides also available on the national site.
Thanks, Dwayne. So I want to start out just with some assumptions here. So what I want to do just kind of read through my land acknowledgement, acknowledging where I'm located in the Saginaw Bay region in Michigan, and acknowledge that as someone with a colonizer identity, I'm a visitor on the land, and my role is to be respectful and to be as much of an advocate, as much of an activist as I can to support land back movements which we'll talk about tonight, um, as part of a mutual aid experience, experiment, project, whatever word you want to use for that. I also want to give acknowledgement to the artist. So the background picture, which I think is just a really cool picture and really fits for the topic tonight. So the artist is a queer Latin visual art artist, communicator, and cultural strategist from Chicago, who's committed to amplifying marginalized voices through art and activism. I've put a link to their Instagram site, so if you're interested in more of their art, you'll see some other examples of their art kind of throughout the presentation, just as a way to amplify to amplify the voice and to amplify the cause for them. What the very first assumption I want us to understand and kind of take into tonight is that social work's political. Whether or not we think it is or not, whatever we do, the choices that we make, the policies that we champion, the roles that we play, they're political roles, and we exist in a political climate. And so this has got to be kind of at the center, the core of our thought process as we move forward. Um, Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read this quote just because I love this quote so much. Um, and and this is from Robin Wall Kimmerer. I don't know how many of you are familiar with her writing, but one of her recent books, I say recent, it came out 10 years ago, but Braiding Sweetgrass, and that's where this is from. And so this is kind of my framework and my way of understanding um, or framing what I'm going to talk about tonight. And so I would just want to read it. Each person, human or no, is bound to every other in a reciprocal relationship. Just as all beings have a duty to me, I have a duty to them. If an animal gives its life to feed me, I am in turn bound to support its life. If I receive a stream's gift of pure water, then I'm responsible for returning a gift in kind. An integral part of a human's education is to know those duties and how to perform them. And for me, this speaks directly to what it means to be a social worker, and specifically what it means for us to be able to engage in mutual aid work. So with kind of that in mind, just kind of carry kind of that sentiment, that thought process throughout our presentation tonight. And by the way, if you all have questions or anything that come up while I'm yapping at you, please feel free to interrupt. It's hard for me to manage watching my slides, going through my slides in the chat. So feel free to interrupt at any point in time. Um, ADHD is strong, so I'm a little bit struggling with some organization. So just interrupt me. Um, Kind of what I have in mind for today is I want to go through and just kind of talk about what is mutual aid, walk through some mutual aid examples, both historical and more contemporary, and then talk about um, contextualizing mutual aid. How does mutual aid kind of fit within social work? What are our professional alignment possibilities? Meaning, how do the values of social work, the principles of social work align with the goals and the values and the principles of mutual aid? What can this look like? How do we integrate a potential abolitionist social work perspective into mutual aid? What does that even mean? And then talk about the possibilities for social workers in mutual aid spaces. And if there are other things that you want me to touch on that I don't have listed here, you can throw those in the chat or just kind of blur them out, and talk about what your expectations are for me tonight, if I don't get to it. So again, to just more clearly articulate what the session objectives are. Um, One, it's to define and describe mutual aid values, principles, and practices. Two, to describe and discuss the alignment between social work principles and mutual aid principles. And three, to articulate the potential role of social workers in contributing to mutual aid efforts within our current political climate. And I think the other big assumption is that there's some assumptions, like the political climate that we're in is challenging, and that feels like uh, maybe the biggest understatement ever. But we have to understand what our role is and what the possibilities are, because we have to remain hopeful. We have to remain optimistic, and I hope to bleed some of that into some perspectives tonight. Like, how do we do that? What does that look like? How do we maintain our engagement in a climate where it's really easy to feel hopeless? Um, and so. I want to kind of situate mutual aid not as just like this brand new thing that we've never talked about, we've never done, but this really historic contextual thing. The quote that I have here is from Peter Kropotkin, and this was from 1891. So this is not recent. But the mutual aid tendency in man has so remote an origin and is so deeply interwoven with all the past evolution of the human race that it's been maintained by mankind up to the present time, notwithstanding all vicissitudes of history. And so, for me, this is where that hope starts. Like, mutual aid has been at the center of human existence for a long time. And it's part of who we are as humans. It's about kind of that collective orientation, the connection that we have to each other, a sense of humanity, and really being able to understand where this is coming from and how well, at least my argument is how well it aligns with social work. Um, and so essentially, what is mutual aid? Um, Mutual aid, it meets a community need, and particularly when those established systems are failing, when they're the source of the problem, or when they're being eliminated by cuts, either at the federal level, the state level, sometimes the local level. Um, Mutual aid historically has been kind of framed as like radical acts of caring. They're often rooted in like this shared understanding that the systems in place are unjust and that those systems often are the sources of the crises they claim to address. I just want you to kind of take a moment to think about that. Think about some of the systems that social workers are a part of. Think about some of the, like maybe even thinking about your field placements and where you're going into, and thinking about, like, I'm thinking like the child welfare system. I'm thinking about housing. I'm thinking about potentially in involvement with law enforcement and even the mental health system, how these systems supposedly exist to attend to the problems, but they actually become the problems or were designed to be part of the problem or to maintain um, power structures or to maintain inaccessibility to particular populations. Um, and so mutual aid offers strategies for more directly addressing issues related to survival, right? To building solidarity, because mutual aid, I want to make a distinction between mutual aid and charity. Mutual aid is not about charity. Mutual aid is about building community. Mutual aid is about building solidarity and challenging those power structures that perpetuate inequality. So again, we're starting to get into hopefully seeing some alignment between mutual aid, the possibilities of mutual aid, and how that aligns with some of our core values, some of our core principles as social workers. Um, Mutual aid, another kind of working definition is that it is really this grassroots bottom-up approach, that it's about collective care, that it tends to the essentials of life, that attends to survival issues, that attends to things like social change, social transformation, particularly in the face of systemic injustices and crises. And I think when I talk about our our current political climate defines systemic injustice and define systemic crisis, at least from my observation, my perspective, that we have a lot of challenges that we're facing. Um, and so finding ways to navigate around or through or outside of our mainstream um, systems has got to be something that we do. It's got to be this creative effort that we take. Mutual aid offers a means for addressing those crises and inequalities by directly meeting the needs of individuals, families, communities, rather than relying on the state or on charity structures to meet that need. It's community providing for community. Um, some of the mutual aid values and principles. Mutual aid is characterized by autonomy, solidarity, inclusivity, and kind of a horizontal organizational structure. And all of that is designed to foster a sense of collective responsibility and shared decision making. That it's not the historic top-down orientation. It's very much this grassroots bottom-up solidarity building, community building approach. And that prioritizes the needs of those marginalized communities and really works towards creating a more just world in kind of this very idealistic sense. Um, Mutual aid, one of the goals is to build solidarity to create viable alternatives to meeting survival needs and to challenge the power structures that, like I said, perpetuate the inequality. It advocates for grassroots solutions to address systemic issues, and it also exists to expose the limitations and the failures or the shortcomings of our existing systems, including our governmental systems and our charity systems. Um, and I think Dean Spade, if you haven't don't know who Dean Spade, he's an organizer, author who has written like one of the defining books on mutual aid. I've got it included in the references for this, but if you haven't read that and you continue to have an interest in mutual aid, check his work out. Like it's fantastic. He distills things in such a fantastic way. Probably much more articulate than I'm being tonight. I tend to ramble, but I'm trying to pull some of his stuff into this presentation as well. But he says that mutual aid projects let us practice meeting our own and each other's needs based on shared commitments to dignity, care, and justice. They let us practice coordinating our actions together with the belief that all of us matter and that we should all get to participate in the solutions to our problems. They let us realize that we know best how to address the crises that we face. So for me, this again kind of aligns with some self-determination stuff, things that we talk about a lot in social work. So I hope you're starting to see some of this connection here. Um, Mutual aid has historic roots, deep roots in Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities. Um, and I would just I hope there's the understanding there that why that is. And I think to articulate that, why that is because these are the communities that have historically been failed by the systems that we're talking about, right? Like we're still talking about inaccessibility to mental health care for these communities, inaccessibility to health care. And so to be able to meet survival needs within these communities, there have had to be more community-based approaches like this for us, by us approach, because mainstream systems are not inclusive to attending to the needs of these communities. Um, Mutual aid has been seen as like acts of resistance and defiance that are really they're practiced out of necessity in the face of inequitable access to basic needs. Um, they serve as a means for developing a better analysis of the conditions of people's lives and building capacity for sustained action to improve those conditions. So it's not just about meeting the most immediate need, but it's also designed to attend to those those structures to dismantle, to expose, to highlight, and to dismantle those systemic inequalities and create more greater access for underserved, marginalized, oppressed communities. Um, so what I want to do too, because for me, like integrate, trying to understand a framework for this from my perspective. Um, think it's important to understand where this is coming from. And so if this is another book recommendation, if you take nothing else out of this presentation tonight, take this book recommendation, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. It's fantastic. It talks a lot about this idea of connection, building community, building solidarity, understanding reciprocity, understanding the spirit of community, looking at things like gift economies to kind of counter and challenge kind of our property market economies, looking at things like gratitude and language of animacy, and looking at how we integrate a more holistic approach, a more connected approach, a more reciprocal approach in all of the work that we do. And so for me, like this indigenous framework very much frames my understanding of what mutual aid is, what the possibilities of mutual aid can be. And so again, I cannot recommend this enough. Actually, just did a book club. We have a decolonizing social work book club that we run here in Region 5 in Michigan. And we actually just discussed this book yesterday. So the timing of this kind of beautiful. And if you want more information about that book club, feel free to hit me up. I've put my contact information at the end of the slideshow.
I'll drop that
Um,
into the chat too, Chris.
that's awesome. Thanks, Dwayne. Um, And so I'm just going to pull another quote from this book. And for me, this really starts to get into like more of a reflection of mutual aid, the possibilities of mutual aid. We need acts of restoration, not only for polluted waters and degraded lands, but also for our relationship to the world. We need to restore honor to the way we live, so that when we walk through the world, we don't have to avert our eyes with shame, so that we can hold our heads up high and receive the respectful acknowledgement of the rest of Earth's beings. And for me, like, this is what social work, this is what mutual aid has to be about. It has to be about living in connection, living in mutuality, living in reciprocity, living in gratitude. And how can we do that within the context of functioning within systems that inherently produce and reproduce and replicate uh, oppression, marginalization, and hurt and pain and grief and trauma. And that's part of that situationality. That's not really a word, I don't think, but that's kind of our position as social workers, is to help navigate that, to figure that out. How do we position ourselves within those systems to be advocates for those we're serving? How do we challenge those systems when we're a part of them? And all of that dissonance that we have to process and deal with as social workers. Just to talk about some historic mutual aid examples. I don't know how familiar you all are with like the Black Panthers, but there's there's a documentary, I forget what it's called, like Black Panthers, Vanguards of something, that was produced by PBS. Um, but if you're curious about it, go check that out. It's beautifully done. It provides a lot of really important historical context. But what a lot of people don't know about the Black Panthers is that they provided mutual aid. Like they're like part of what they were doing was serving their community because their community was excluded from mainstream accessible access to mainstream systems. So they had a free food program. They provided breakfast. They also did free health clinics. Uh, and so really for me, when I think of mutual aid, these are like the big mainstream historical things that stand out the most. We also have like these co-ops or cooperative stores that emerged during and following the Great Depression. Um, and so, again, it's community serving community. It's community serving community outside of those mainstream systemic supports that are supposed to, quote unquote, supposed to help meet the needs of communities. Um, some contemporary mutual aid examples. I'm not going to go through these in a lot of detail, but I would highly encourage you to just do a Google search for contemporary mutual aid. Um, but one of the things that we'll talk about is about land return or kind of the land back movement, which is oriented in the indigenous native culture to it's a kind of about land repatriation, right? And returning the land to whose land it is. To begin with, we're talking about things like workers' co-ops. We're talking about things like immigrant co-ops, um, and then workers' self-directed nonprofits. I wish I knew more about what these are. But they sound really interesting. And I feel like I need to do a little bit more research, a little bit more homework on those. One thing I will also mention is that there is um, a new kind of emerging movement within social work. Um, it's about how specifically how can social workers engage in mutual aid for us? How do we support each other? How do we attend to all of these needs for each other? So if you do some research, there's an organization, I think it's called SWIM, but that started out of Ohio, and there are chapters in several states now, but it's social workers engaging in mutual aid with each other and identifying resources and things like that. Because again, we're existing and we're working and we're doing this work in a really challenging, really disruptive time. And so a lot of the resources that we have, funding that we had, access to particular programs that we had, a lot of that's going away, a lot of that's disappearing. So how do we continue to function? How do we continue to meet the needs of the individuals, of the families, of the communities that we're serving and that we're serving in when these resources no longer exist? And a lot of that's about creativity, it's about networking, it's about engaging in like mutual aid type of work with each other. For more kind of concrete examples, like just everyday mutual aid, right? Like things that I think of that kind of immediately stick out to me, things like those little free libraries, community book exchanges, like community food pantries, neighborhood carpooling, like to transportation to the polls, transportation to appointments, participating in excuse me, like community meal trains, like when there's a loss of a family member in a community or loss of a coworker's family member and doing meal trains and establishing like neighborhood exchanges and even just sharing knowledge, having conversations with each other, talking about different resources, networking, building relationships. All of that is what mutual aid looks like in an everyday sort of way. And so we can all engage in
because you
mutual
said the kids were here and started talking.
so we all have opportunities to engage um, in mutual aid. And just to provide some context here, I know I've talked about system failure, but I just want to name it. I just want to put it out there. I just want to say like my perspective on what I see. And right now we've got government systems that are just failing, that they're not meeting the needs that they're just theoretically designed to meet. Um, Government systems have become the source of a lot of problems, have become the source of discrimination, have be become the source of pain, have become a source of trauma. Um, Government systems of support that had existed previously are being eliminated by federal and state authorities, whether that's being gutted, whether that's being dismantled, whether that's being underfunded, whether that's being not funded anymore. I think immediate like Department of Education, right? Like that's something that is no longer going to continue to be supported in the way that historically has been. And a lot of these systems that are being gutted are the ones that social workers want work in and are dependent upon to be able to and to do their job and to function as social workers. And there are a lot of the systems that the individuals, families, and communities that we work with, that we serve, are participants in. So we have to be knowledgeable of like this political context to be able to help our families navigate these systems, to help them identify where are the loopholes? How can we do this? What does this need to look like? How do we still get our needs met? Um, I'm remembering a quote. I don't remember who it's by, but it's this idea of we have to know the systems well enough that we can teach those that we work with how to break the rules, how to find the loopholes, how to get their needs met in a way that may not be as conventional, that we have to be a little bit more subversive, um, because we've got families with needs that aren't even close to being met, right? Um, and even looking at systems of support beyond the government, so things like charities, things like food banks and nonprofits, at this, like they're being so overburdened and underfunded that they're no longer able to meet the needs of the communities that they're serving either. And so that's where kind of that mutual aid piece can sit is like if government systems aren't going to meet the needs, if charity systems, nonprofits aren't able to meet the overflowing needs, then what's left? And what's left is community. What's left is mutual aid. Um, and mutual aid typically is not exclusionary. If you're a part of the community, cool, get support, provide support, be involved. Whereas government systems and charities tend to maintain qualify exclusionary criteria for access, at which again kind of perpetuates this idea of who's deserving, who's not deserving of support, who's deserving, who's not deserving of help, which historically has been a thing that we've had to deal with in social work. Um, when we talk about the consequences of systemic failure, specifically within the context of social workers and what we do, we're talking about reduced or restricted access to systems of support. Um, we're talking about increased family separation. We're talking about increased risk of health crises, increased risk of homelessness and lack of housing. We're talking about increased instability within our infrastructure. We're talking about economic destabilization or rising inflation, like all of this stuff, perpetuation of like these deservingness models. That's what systemic failure looks like. These are the consequences that we as social workers see every day in the work that we do, right? We're the ones on the front lines. We're the ones working with the families. We're the ones working in the communities that are impacted by these policy choices and these policy failures. And so we have to find ways to be able to meet the needs and maybe more creative or non-traditional ways, kind of outside of the system. And so one of the things that I hope that you've seen as I've kind of been talking is where there are alignment possibilities between social work and mutual aid. Like if you look at our professional values, if you look at our ethical responsibilities, if you look at our theoretical grounding in that um, ecological systems approach, and you look at the applicable skills, you look at the skills that you're learning in school, the things that you're learning how to apply in your field placement, like there's so much universal alignment in what we as social workers can do and how we can contribute in mutual aid efforts. Like there's really strong value alignment, there's strong ethical alignment. I would say, like, to use like a Liam Neeson kind of Taken reference, we have a particular set of skills as social workers that make us uniquely qualified to be able to function and to serve in these spaces, to be able to make them successful, to be able to do the organizing, to do the solidarity building, to do the community building, to increase community capacity to meet these. And like we have those skills and we have the understanding and the know-how to do it. And so we should be doing it. Like that's my argument. So we should be doing it. Um, and so again, just to kind of put some of those to paper or to kind of bullet point them, as social workers, our primary goals are to help people and to address social problems. We're supposed to challenge social injustice. We're supposed to respect the inherent dignity and worth of people. We're supposed to recognize the central importance of human relationships. We're supposed to work within and across micro, meso, macro systems. And again, we have a particular set of skills to do this work with individuals, families, groups, and communities. That's my argument is that we can and we should and we need to be doing this. The problem is historically, we've not done this, right? So when I say social work so quiet, what I'm talking about is what's on this slide, is that we continually perpetuate kind of this settler colonialism, these white supremacist ideas, these white supremacist norms that we become socialized by the hegemony or the power that we claim to fight against, that we become blinded to issues of hegemonic culture within our own profession, that we become resistant to doing that self-critique, and that we remain largely silent as revolutionary moments unfold, that we're not at the table, that our voices aren't heard, that we aren't a part of big systemic change. Um, and that's problematic, right? That historically social work has relied on being connected to systems of authority, systems of power, that we've lacked this professional dedication to meaningful radical change and structural transformation, that we tend to settle for reform, that we tend to settle with the status quo. I think about, I used to teach social work, and one of the things that I used to do on the first day of class, was particularly in my policy class, was ask students, so how many of you want to be instruments of change, to be agents of change? And like everyone's hand goes up and everyone's super excited. And then Debbie Downer here asks them, how many of you want to be cogs in a system that perpetuates oppression? As you can, not as many hands go up. And so that's a critique of social work. It's not a critique of the students. It's not a critique of us individually as professionals, as growing professionals, emerging professionals. It's a critique of our system of social work. And I don't critique it because I don't think it can do better. I critique it because I know it can do better. It has to do better. I love being a social worker, and I want social work to be better. And so that's part of what I'm talking about tonight. Like social work historically, we've not been great about supporting social movements. We've kind of co-opted some of the ideas, methods, and victories that have come from big social movements. We've kind of stolen some of those ideas and kind of reframe them for our own purposes. That we have extensive history of complicity with social control systems, I think about like the child welfare system or the family policing system and mandated report. I think about all of that stuff and how we've become such a part of like this system of surveillance, this system of control. And it's problematic. Um, and historically, we've upheld and justified white supremacy and deficit-based thinking that we've, I won't say championed, but not challenged, segregated, anti-native, and decidedly religious organizations. I think about charity organization societies that are a part of our history, um, and that we've aligned strongly with religious organizations, faith-based movements, things like that that can be exclusionary, can be oppressive. Um, that we have this really heavy patriarchal influence that's contributed to social work. Like if you look at in your classes, go through and look at who wrote the textbooks, who wrote the articles that you're reading. A lot of kind of the core ideas, a lot of the core theories, a lot of the core practices that we continue to teach in schools of social work um, are written by and for old white men, and that's problematic because a lot of the ideas, a lot of the systems that we talk that are antiquated ideas that they don't fit where we are right now. But you know, this white supremacist, this patriarchy continues to influence and persist within our profession, and that we tend to kind of align more with the medical model, which views people as problems to be treated. And this comes from kind of our close alignment with psychology and psychiatry, and that's problematic. And these are the things that we need to figure out how to challenge, that we have to own them, own that this is a part of our history, and then work towards challenging those. And my argument is that involvement in mutual aid spaces uh, can be an opportunity to do that. Um, Another thing I want to talk about is like social work. We do a really good job of kind of talking the talk, right? Like we have the values. We can talk about doing the social justice work. We can talk about social change. We can talk about social transformation, but we don't really take as much action on it. Like we lack that commitment to walk the walk, even though we talk the talk. Like we're really good at talking. We're really good at looking at our code of ethics and holding it up. Like we've got this, but how do we live it? How do we make it more actionable? How do we operationalize it? Um, so the profession kind of stalls in moving social justice, that ideal and that value into action or into motion, that we're not really largely involved in efforts for systemic change. Some of the research indicates that there's been a decline in activism within the field, with social workers spending less than about 2% of their time engaging in macro practices. And that's just not enough, right? Like I know that a lot of us are interested in doing the clinical work and that's where we have to focus and blah, blah, blah. But if we don't take a more generalist approach, if we don't understand that we have a role and a responsibility to working to change and address systemic oppression through macro work, then we're not really doing social work, right? Like I know that's a big claim, a big argument, but that's where we're at. Um, and so when I talk about how do we work towards changing this, what do potential frameworks for social work and mutual aid look like? What I'm talking like activism needs to be the norm. Like social workers, again, we have the particular set of skills to be effective in doing advocacy and community organizing work. We have to speak up. Like we can't continue to be silent. We need to refuse to remain silent. That we have to call for a reawakening and a radical confrontation of some of those white supremacist and patriarchal norms that have informed and influenced our profession. That we have to commit to dismantling all systems of oppression. That we must work compassionately to support each other. So again, this mutual aid idea, that we have to be creative, we have to support each other, we have to build rapport, we have to build networks, um, that we have to build a healthy culture of resistance, of accountability, and of sustainability. and now we have to work towards our own liberation, that we have to engage in solidarity building. Um, and really, I think this ties in beautifully to next month's student series about this idea of like unionization and building unions within like all of this is I hope you'll see the alignment here, and it's really exciting to see some of the movements that are happening in social work now. Um, Around this. It's working towards kind of shifting that narrative and how we continue to kind of push for that, how we need to continue to shift that narrative is to move away from problematizing the focus on marginalized communities and identity and shifting that to increasing a focus on resistance to change, addressing issues like privilege, structural barriers to change. Um, another point that I think often goes unsaid and untalked about is that we've got to increase our bravery about challenging institutions that reinforce oppression, that we understanding again our own positionality, um, our own social position, and how we leverage that, how we use the power that we have access to, and how do we be brave, how do we be smart, how do we be courageous within the current political climate that can be absolutely devastating and terrifying to so many of us and to so many of the people within our community. We have to kind of shift away from kind of this very voyeuristic view of communities and color and turn our focus more inward. And how do we evaluate how we actually show up for the work? What does that look like? How do we show up? How do we have presence? How do we have kind of this anti-oppressive, like meaningful anti-oppressive presence in the work that we do? What does this look like in our spaces? What does this look like in your field placement organizations? What does this look like in the classrooms? We need to get more involved in policy and macro practice, despite our preconceptions of it being too much. It's too big. Like, there's nothing I can do. Like, how can my one voice, like, we've got to move away from that. We have to be more intentional about being more involved in these macro spaces. That we need to unlearn the normalization of immutability to avoid colluding with systems of power and systems of dominance that continue just to reinforce the narrative that there's nothing that we can do. Like, we've got to move away from this stuff. Um, and we need to be more overt. We need to overtly challenge kind of that false dichotomy between micro and macro social work. Like, that's not a real thing. It's not a thing that, well, I'm just going to do micro practice or I'm just going to do macro. That's not how this works. Like, we have to do social work, and social work is micro and macro and meso. It's all of it. And we have to do that. We have to support each other in doing it. We have to find space to be able to do it. We can't just sit in our little silos or sit in our little vacuums and not engage with each other. We have to be connected. We have to do this work. We have to build relationships. We have to do this together. And so one of the final things I want to talk about is this idea of connectivity and not operating in silos, not operating um, in spaces without support. And I'm going to use a reference from nature, and this again is from the book Braiding Sweetgrass. And the quote is, "The trees act not as individuals, but somehow as a collective." Exactly how they do this, we don't know yet. But what we see is the power of unity. What happens to one happens to us all. We can starve together or feast together. And I think that's where we're at right now as social work. We can either starve together or we can feast together. So we need to find ways to build connectivity, to build systems that are mutually supportive. How do we connect with each other and find purpose? Because purpose disrupts despair. And I know that that feeling of despair, that feeling of hopelessness, um, is a real thing right now. Um, and I don't want us to get stuck there, right? I don't want us to feel stuck being hopeless, to feel stuck being powerless, but to find purpose, to find meaning, to find a space to fight and then to fight. and to fight together and to build those connections and to fight for the communities that we serve, fight for the individuals and the families that we serve. And so, um, list of references. I hope everything that I talked about is included in here, but if not, on the next slide, I've got my contact information. Dwayne dropped my contact information in the chat. So please feel free to reach out. Some of the ones that I would particularly highlight on here would be Adrienne Marie Brown, An Emergent Strategy. That's another book that you absolutely have to read. Like it's transformative in terms of understanding how social change happens. And I think it's beautiful. And then the one that I mentioned before by Dean Spade, just called Mutual Aid. You need to check those out. And just kind of self-promotion, one of the things that I pulled from was an article that I wrote. It's called Decentering Whiteness Through Revisualizing Theory in Social Work Education, Practice, and Scholarship. It's in the journal Advances in Social Work, which is open access, so you can access that for free. It's a whole thing on attending to white supremacy within social work. And then I've put my contact information on here. Email is far and away the easiest way to get a hold of me. You can also text. Don't just call because if I don't recognize your number, I'm not going to answer it. Shy introvert. So you can text and let me know, and then we can set up phone calls that way. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and kind of open it up to questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. Lots of really good comments and thoughts in the chat. People engaging in a lot of meaningful ways. See a lot of the affirmation symbol in there, which I love. There's a question from Alicia that I wanted to read and get your thoughts on. So this is a broad question. How do we as social workers navigate the challenge presented to our professional boundaries by the reciprocity expected within mutual aid? In a social work context, receiving any kind of benefit back from clients is grossly unethical or maybe perceived as grossly unethical. In mutual aid, refusing help from the community is generally considered demonstrative of a paternalistic approach.
That is a fantastic question. I don't know that I have a great answer to it. I think that's one of those things that we collectively navigate. So what I would do, I would kind of put it back out to the group. Like what thoughts do others here have about that question? Because I know like my response is going to be more specific to me and my experience and in the work that I do, but what does it look like for other people? What are some of the challenges that you might see, or how would you approach that?
Folks, feel free to use the raise your hand feature, and if you want to come off of mute, or you can just come off of mute if you're comfortable doing that, or if you'd like to put things in the chat. So while people are kind of formulating ideas, I'll just say kind of in my sense around some of these ethical conversations, specifically as it relates to gifts or trades for services. Our code of ethics is usually never black and white on any issue, right? And this is one of those ones too. Like gifts are appropriate sometimes. It's the culturally right thing to do when you're working with certain clients, working in certain sorts of communities. If you're in a rural area where you may be the only, dual relationships happen, and there are often situations where it is okay and maybe expected that you might be bartering or trading or getting gifts for a certain sort of service. Alicia, I see your hand.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm from Austin, Texas, for anybody who was wondering. Just want to throw that out there. No, so the gift thing is, I think, interesting. When I asked the question originally, I was actually coming at it from a more abstract perspective in terms of what I meant by benefit, right? Like obviously, like if a client shows up and they say, "Oh, I made cookies and I brought you some because I remember you like cookies," or something, that's whatever. I don't care about that. It's the thing that I'm concerned about is that so for just example, I come from I'm a child of immigrants. I'm a Russian American. I'm a first generation American also. Sorry, I'm like Nicholas, stop hitting my microphone. And in Russian culture, for example, there are some very strong often very gendered roles about what help you are allowed to receive and in what context. And one of the most like successful tools that I found for navigating the ability to help somebody who could use the help in my own culture has been finding a way to frame that help as something that is beneficial to me. So, as an example, like my mom recently has been helping a friend that's been having a really challenging time because she's retired and is busy and or isn't busy anymore and has like a lot of free time on her hands and it's driving her nuts. I suggested to my mom for an unrelated reason that she go to her local public library to get support for resume writing. And I suggested to her, I was like, hey, you should tell Vita, that's her friend. I was like, you should tell Vita, that she should come with you to support you because you're nervous about going to this thing, which is also true. Like my mom was nervous because I think because she'd been a librarian. I was like, because I think that like having the opportunity to participate in her local library as like a volunteer for whatever amount of time, like might be beneficial to her. And even if she doesn't take you up on that, she might explore that avenue in the future, right? So it's like that's something that's a very, very prevalent like mode of interacting within the community that I'm a part of. And doing something like that is like completely outside of the bounds of social work ethics as described, in most social work education in the United States. So I just like the difference in those two things is glaring. Like if I were to approach the person that I gave in that example and just directly offer them help, they would absolutely just say no, refuse it, and never get helped in the first place.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things that I'm thinking about when I was in grad school, one of the projects I worked on was working with uh, refugee communities. So looking at working with people from kind of this really broad range of spaces, whether that be from Burma, from Somalia, from the Congo, and working to increase the capacity of like those organizations within those communities to increase their capacity to help meet the needs of people within their own community, rather than like me coming in as a social worker. Here's what I think you should do, right? And so it's trying to provide connect resources in whatever way we're able to and help communities help themselves, right? This idea of so I don't know where I was going with that, but your comment made me think of that and this idea of just community capacity building in general.
Great thought. The other thing I would recommend for folks is as you're experiencing maybe ethical dilemmas throughout your time in social work, whether that's in your internship, in your personal life, or in your actual professional space. Most of the NASW chapter, actually all the NASW chapters across the country have ethics committees, and they do ethics consultations. Our Michigan chapter does ethical consultations almost every week. And then our national office also does have consultations for members too. And so that's an additional resource if you need just someone else to run some things by. And then also the code of ethics is a living document. It changes about every 3 years. And so actually in 2026 is the next round where it will be up for review. And so if there are recommendations for wording changes, and I know there's been a lot of conversations in the last few years about having more worker-friendly language or unionization of collective bargaining. This is going to be a really big year in the next 12 months for our social work community all across the country to provide input to that revision process. Really good question there and some feedback. Next question kind of came in from Zoe or Zoe. For you, Chris. I've been told by several LCSWs that I need to reconsider my public activism participation as I move into the field and out of grad school. I'm still pondering how this could look without sacrificing my personal ethical commitment to activism. As somebody who is a clinical social worker working in a private practice space, I wonder how you would answer that question or talk to your colleagues who are saying that to you.
Oh, that's so frustrating. And it's very familiar. I remember when I first started, I went into a PhD program almost right out of my MSW program, and I was told the same thing. Basically, shut up until you get tenure. Um, like shut down all of your activism because you want to be successful and blah blah blah. And my response was always this very self-righteous response. It's like, well, I'm going to do what I want to do. And at that point, I didn't have the self-reflection to recognize that privileged response, right? And so how do we have conversations with colleagues who maybe are recommending that it's actually use I would rec even using the code of ethics to do that, right? Like talking about our values, talking about those core principles and talking about um, how we want our own social work to look because activism and macro engagement policy advocacy is a part of social work, right? And how do we do that um, as part of our function, our identity as social workers is going to look different for each of us. And we need to continue to encourage more people to get involved. Because I think a lot of people fall back, well, I just don't have time to do it. I just don't have the energy to do it. Um, and we have to be more intentional than that. And I see a hand raised, so I'm going
Yeah,
to defer
Kimberly, it
to
looks
that.
like you've got your hand raised.
I do. Can I first say thank you for this topic and thank you for your transparency because you blown me away with right out the gate when you started talking about your position of privilege, and then from that space started to advocate for so many things that I was trying to take notes as you were going. My question is, you talked about the current political climate in the face of people being canceled for standing up and being discounted or silenced or credentials removed. We're working so hard to get these credentials. We're working hours to present ourselves in a way that we can advocate for our community. What would you suggest as students, as we are new, that in the face of this current climate that just what you say can get you um, removed or sat down before you even got started. How do we move forward and stand up and say, hey, at core, my authentic being says this is right or this is wrong, and make space for altering opinions at the same time?
That is a beautiful question, and I think so immediately relevant. Like I was actually thinking about that today. Like I will acknowledge, like my response again is going to be shaped by my experience and my identities, and I recognize that I can be a little bit more of a pain in the ass and I can poke and kick a little bit more because of who I am. And that's kind of my role, I think, in creating social change and transformation. It's finding my space, finding how I can do that in the most effective way possible. So I'm never going to recommend that someone who may feel at risk for being canceled or like you don't have to take that opportunity. Use your network, um, collaborate with each other, connect with each other, and understand kind of the power that you have to leverage and use it that way. So it's kind of that self-assessment, like what are you willing to risk and how do you engage in that work in the most effective way possible in the spaces that you're in. And whether maybe that's just having conversations with people in your space. Maybe that's having conversations with fellow students. Maybe that's having conversations with faculty. Maybe that's having conversations with other people in your work environment. And so maybe it even just starts with small conversations and building networks and rapport building and building networks, um, and understanding again, understanding risk and not taking those steps that are going to jeopardize you. Like the very specific example that I have. So I had just graduated college. This is gonna date me. And so I graduated in May of 2000 from undergrad, and my partner and I and our best friend went to Washington, D.C. with a group um, to participate in a protest. And one of the stages of the protest was an organized civil disobedience. So people were going to intentionally be arrested. And because just out of college, my wife was still in college at the time. Like we were poor. We didn't have money. We couldn't be arrested because of our own limitations. And we wanted to be because we felt committed to the cause. We wanted to do something. And one of the opportunities that came up were people who can't risk their professional license, like attorneys who wanted to be they made donations. And so they collected funding to pay for costs associated with people who couldn't afford to be arrested financially. So the three of us, we were sponsored to get arrested. So we volunteered to get arrested for the cause because we're young, we didn't have licensure stuff to worry about. And so it's just making sure there are systems in place so that people can be engaged at whatever level they're able to be. And I just thought that was a really cool example. Like to be sponsored to be arrested by someone who couldn't risk their own personal license, but they still wanted to be engaged.
That's a
That
great
helps
example,
a
Chris.
lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, my camera decided to just stop working, so I'm just a bunch of plants right now. But I will add, we are at a time in social work, and we always have been, where there is underground social work happening and has to happen because some of our practice is illegal in different parts of the country, right? If you're providing abortion information, if you're providing affirming care, if you're working with immigrant communities, and so many of you to practice ethically will have to practice illegally in some ways. And that is very professionally challenging to be in that environment. And so part of it is, what calculated risks are you willing and able to take in your space, right? We know not everyone can afford to lose their jobs, right? And so you may have to take different risks depending on your own life circumstances in your family. And we're in a time now where certain words are banned. You may be a part of research that you have to reframe all of your messaging. You might be working for the VA. You can't put a flag on your wall, or you can't put your pronouns in your signature line. But that doesn't mean maybe in your off time you can be doing activism work. And if you're worried even at that space, it's what coalitions or organizations do you belong to that can do the work? If you cannot, who can? And so that sometimes is, where are you investing your money or your other skill sets that you may not be able to use at your organization. And so that in social work, there are quite a few organizations. I mean, NASW obviously is one of those. We're doing a lot of political advocacy, but we need more social workers working on the ground in all of our states, because there is heavy lifts, and most of the chapters within NASW don't have a policy staff person. And so they desperately need you all on the ground helping figure out strategy and some of this pushback, and being proactive in some of those spaces too. And I'll say, the larger, especially for students, you can build out your network, the more success you're going to have when you find some of these professional challenges. Because if you find yourself in a state or in a job that you can't do certain things, or you're being told you can't do certain things, maybe you need to rely on a different state or a different organization to do that. And so I'll just give one example, and then I'll turn it over to Marianne for a question. When I was at the national conference in Chicago, I'm from Michigan. I run the Michigan chapter of NASW, but I had colleagues from both Pennsylvania and Ohio come up to me at this conference and say, hey, we can't provide affirming care, or clients in our state are losing access. Do you have a resource list of Michigan providers who we can send them to, right? And that's kind of what we all are having to figure out in this moment, depending on what our state or the national politics are throwing at us. And there's going to be a lot more need for us to be connected and communicating over the next several years. So I really appreciate you all being on here and building your own network out a little bit more. Marianne, please go ahead.
Hi, so I am a baby social worker student. I started in June. So I actually for the past 4 years have been an educator in the public school system in Texas. And I've already found myself, because my admin knows I'm going to school for social work, I've already found myself in situations where they look at me as sort of an advocate with some sort of knowledge. I make it very clear that I'm not licensed or anything, but my question is, for any experienced social workers in this call, how do you get over the fear or the nervousness to push against what your higher ups are telling you because you know that it's wrong or incorrect?
I think my response to that would be similar to uh response I gave to the previous one, is like it's assessing your own risk, right? And understanding kind of your position and understanding kind of where you fit, and what you're willing to do, right? I think so I'll use myself as an example because I am a quiet, nervous, anxious person to begin with. And so I'm not one to that's going to historically was not someone who would challenge something that I felt was wrong because I don't want to make waves. I want to stay under the radar. But at a certain point, like there are tipping points, right? Where I have to do something. And so it's finding ways to do that in ways that feel safe for you. One of the first things that I did, I worked at a domestic violence shelter, and I saw things that were happening that went against kind of our code of ethics, right? And so rather than like directly confronting, I just put a copy of our code of ethics in everyone's mailbox. And we brought it up at our next staff meeting. I had a conversation with one other person, someone that I felt comfortable with, who um, was maybe a little bit more vocal than I am. Um, and we decided how to present that at the next staff meeting. And so a lot of the response is going to be the same. It's building networks, building relationships, connecting with each other, and finding how you can use your strengths in the most effective way. I think fear and anxiety is kind of a natural part of some of the work that we do, and I think sometimes it's okay to be scared, right? I think there are a lot of things that we're not always going to feel comfortable with, but we know we need to do. It's that I forget who, but standing up and speaking your voice, even when it shakes, right? Even when your voice shakes, still doing it, and finding how you can do that in a way that's going to feel safe and healthy for you.
The other thing I'd add to that is usually you're not the only one thinking that. So where's the allies within your work, right? Who maybe it doesn't need to just be you that's coming forward. And maybe if you had a small group of people that may change the dynamic or give you more credibility when you go talk to somebody. And so again, the power in numbers and collective action. I saw that Pilar had your hand up. If you're still wanting to speak, Pilar, please feel free to unmute. If not, I've got kind of a final question that probably will take us the last 5 to 10 minutes.
Sure. I was just going to agree. I was going to say you don't get over the fear of the risk. I can talk as a brown person right now. I fear being disappeared. I fear being targeted. I have loads of fear. And yet the other day I did an interview that can possibly get me in a lot of trouble because it was it was a question about how I feel this current administration is doing, this current orange person is doing. And I weighed the pros and the cons. And I was like, okay, well, here we go. And the whole time I was doing that interview, I was like terrified. But I also feel like, well, somebody has to say it. So be it. And I hope that I have a strong enough community that if something happens or if somebody attempts to do something, you know, it will be mutual because we are not alone and we can only do this if we are united. There's more of us than there is them. And I think this fear the current administration has makes us feel like we're alone, but we're not. There's a lot of us who are like, And I'm also thinking of the fact that this is being recorded, so I'm not like cursing like I usually would, or telling you what a this whole is. But do what you need to do, weigh your pros and cons. ACLU, for example, they have all these Know Your Rights series. Get to know your rights. Whether you're protesting, whether you're in your car, and they'll tell you state by state what your rights are. The rights, whether you're here legally, even though honestly, I don't think there's a such thing as being here illegal. That's bull. That's the whole manufacturer thing, right? But know your rights in every situation. And then they're looking for people to text and to call others and letting they're doing a lot of things in different states. There are so many organizations in so many places doing things, and if you don't have the capacity to do something right this very moment, that's also okay. Give yourself grace, and don't let this current administration take away moments of joy. It's okay to laugh, it's okay to smile, because those peppers do not get to win. They don't get to take that away from us. So do what you need to do and know that you might be scared, and that's also okay.
Yeah, and I will say, to reiterate that to Pilar, the people at the top of organizations are also very scared. So even though you may be an entry level, an intern, and you're feeling scared, a lot of the folks who actually have power are also feeling the same thing. So also, it's again, how do we collectively work through this? And absolutely, we need to find the joy. We need to be laughing. We need to be doing all the things together to keep our energy high, because people need us now more than ever. And if we fold, that's what they want, right? They want us to not be able to do our jobs. So going into our last little bit of time together, Chris, this kind of comes through a couple of questions or thoughts in the chat around what are some ways people can get involved in action, or starting to get involved in some of these more advocacy macro spaces. Maybe it's not so much of how do we get into the underground social work. Maybe that's another one of these that I'll have to pull together, because I think that is a really good topic that we should be talking about right now, but also probably shouldn't be in a recorded Zoom if we're going to do a session like that, right? But can you give some tips, and maybe we can hear from the audience too, of how folks are currently getting involved with advocacy work, and what sort of skills you might be able to develop as a student to get into that space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe bias coming through, but get involved with NASW. And NASW is a good starting point for all social workers, all social work students, like the resources available, the advocacy, like reading the policy briefs, reading all of, like, just familiarize yourself with the organization, and start to find ways to get involved. Like the Michigan chapter, we have so many committees and so many things that you can volunteer to become a part of. Is opening the door for yourself. And so I'm always going to start with NASW for social workers. And I also think it's going to depend on kind of what are some of your issues, what are the things that you're passionate about, what are the things that you're wanting to get involved in. So I'm like, a lot of the work I do is with trans, non-binary youth and young adults. So I'm involved with things like Equality Michigan and PFLAG stuff, and doing that kind of work, doing volunteer work in those spaces. And so just doing a little bit of Googling and finding, like, what are the organizations doing work in your area, and how can you get involved? Like, I don't know. I don't know, that's not a good answer. It's the end of the day, and I'm very tired, so I
Okay. Well,
apologize.
and there were some really good suggestions also just put into the chat from folks, from practical ways, going to a local board meeting or city council meeting, running for office. We have students run for a whole bunch of offices, whether that's at the School of Social Work level or something at the state or federal level. It's getting involved with your local political party potentially at that level, going to a rally. Most of our states have legal observers for advocacy events, which is actually a really good way to protect yourself if you are worried about maybe your licensing type, where it means you're an outside observer when you go to a protest or a rally. You're not an active participant, but you're making sure there's no overwhelming police presence or something fishy going on there. Connecting to your local legal organizations in your state. They're really important right now, as there's been so many lawsuits at both the state and federal level, as we've seen certain sorts of care be under attack too. I will say for me, when I was starting to get involved in kind of advocacy work, there's so many things going on your campuses. Like that's a really good way to start. If you've never attended a rally or protest, just go and like stand on the outside of one of them and just observe and see what's there. 2026 is going to be a lot of major elections in most of our states. So this is the time where it's like find the candidates that vibe well for you and are aligned with our code of ethics, and help them knock doors, do social media, sign postcards, right? There are things that are for introverts and extroverts in this advocacy space. So find the little bit of time that you have in your life, incorporate them into your assignments for your classes, ask your faculty if you can count hours for this thing or your internship. We always have our interns like do policy and advocacy stuff as part of their time with us. And so use the resources of your campus while you have them, because your schools have money, most of them in some pot. Get to trainings. I think that that's also a good opportunity, even if they aren't macro quote unquote focus. There is good networking that happens at all of these conferences that happen in our state. Most of your states have legislative days or lobby days through your NASW chapter that are organized, and you just got to show up and they'll tell you kind of what to do and what to say. Those are good opportunities. Payment for placement. There's national movements on student internships, on collective bargaining. There's really a lot of things happening right now in the social work space. And I also am going to drop the link to ACOSA, which is our macro social work association. It's the Association for Community Organization and Social Action and in social work, and they also have student memberships as well. And so that's a couple of ideas that I had as well. You can be an election inspector or work as a poll monitor, and sometimes those pay as well. So especially as we get into an election year, those are easy things. All right, let's see if there's any last questions. We got a couple minutes left. I know there's a lot of specific topics that I'm just going to refrain from probably bringing it into today. I guess, Chris, how do you find peers across the country or in your own state? If you do have a specific area that you're interested in working in or going into, how do you find folks in that particular community?
That's a good question, because I've thought about that a lot. Like, because again, I'm not a super social person, so a lot of it for me is um, using the network that I already have, and what are networks other people are involved in. A lot of mine kind of initially started with social media, but I feel that's not quite as safe as it was like when I was in grad school. But one of the things that I always talk about is your peers in school. Like for me, like I graduated with my MSW. Oh my gosh, it's been forever ago at this point, like 15 years ago. But they're still some of my best friends. They're still the people that I go to. They are involved in so many different areas of practice in so many different states that if I have questions, like that's who I'm going to go to. Um, are my peers, are the people that I graduated with, are the people that I went to school with. So developing those relationships and really fostering those and nurturing those, I think is probably one of the biggest recommendations I can give, because those are going to be your colleagues.
And the only other thing I'll add to that is sometimes you're going to have to be the first one in somebody's spaces as a social worker. There's a specific example of like cannabis reform in the chat. Like, depending on your state, there may not be other social workers or very many that are working on that. And your state may not be politically ready for any of that at this particular moment. Doesn't mean the wheels don't start moving now, but you might have to be working with a different set of professionals in this time, because they're likely, that may be where like criminal justice intersects, because they're sometimes working on that. In Michigan, there's a whole cannabis education series in one of our counties that we've partnered with to offer social continuing education. So you may have little pockets in your state, like where are people already starting in this, and then getting involved, and then you can bring it back to your NASW chapter, and they can kind of tell you like, yeah, we think that this is worth us investing time or creating a work group on, or a committee that can focus on this. But sometimes it is you bringing the idea forward. And that's okay too. We need somebody to start. And we all got good ideas. So, Chris, I just want to say thank you for all of this. This was really great discussion. I think it's very timely right now. We need to be having these honest and frank discussions with each other. We need to not always skirt our language around what we're dealing with in the world, and how do we best connect as a social work community and a larger world at this particular moment. So thank you for your expertise. You're willing to engage with us. Thank everybody for hopping on today. I know being at the end of any week is already kind of long, so I really appreciate you all. And we will hopefully see you all at our October program on unionization. And if folks have other ideas of things that they'd like to see us do, please feel free to reach out to me. The recording will be posted probably by early next week, so just be on the lookout for that if you do need to watch or want to get back to some of Chris's references. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good night or rest of your afternoon.